Welcome back to another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. I'm Steven.
And I'm Luke.
We have a special guest today here with us today.
Dr. Jeff Pettis from Texas A&M. He got his PhD in the tracheal mite, but has worked a ton of other things, lots and lots. Actually, I was going to list some of your citations, but there's too many to list. So you were president of Apimondia, just stepped down from there, and you had a full-time USDA research practice as well, and you currently have Pettis and Associates LLC, which advises on bee health and pollinator issues and apiculture worldwide. So today we have him here because I have a lot of questions on a new threat, a new mite in our beekeeping area, at least in the Midwest and in North America, and it's the Tropilaelaps mite.
Well, hold on. I don't think it's here.
It's not here. You're right.
But I don't know if it's new. It was found in 1961, correct?
Yeah.
So it's been around for like 80 years, but it's mostly a Southern Asia, Thailand, Korea original mite, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So so in that southern region, an area, it developed alongside like the Apis dorsata and the Apis cerana, right? So, which is also, I think, where the Varroa mite came from?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it came from Apis cerana and jumped on our bees, Apis mellifera. Yeah.
Okay. And then also is the tracheal mites from the same area? Is that correct? I think that's correct. I'm not sure.
No, tracheal mites have always been associated with our Western or European honeybee, really. But it kind of popped up. So to our knowledge, it didn't jump from any of the Asian bees, but certainly Varroa did, and also now Tropilaelaps. Yep.
Okay. So let's start with where you started in beekeeping. So Steve and I have talked at length about where we started in this whole beekeeping process. Were you always a beekeeper, or was this something that you went to school and fell in love with?
I grew up in rural Georgia, middle Georgia, and I grew up in a farming community. We lived on a farm, but we didn't have bees. So I grew up in a farming community. I went to University of Georgia and took a beekeeping course, beekeeping biology, and I kind of just fell in love with them there. The next semester, I was already the teaching assistant for the major professor, and I went on to do a master's degree with him. So that was in 1982 and 83.
Okay.
So I've been keeping bees ever since.
Okay.
So,
and you currently have hives?
I have between 80 and 100 currently. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that'll keep you busy. That's basically, to give you an idea, what Steve and I run. I run basically 100 hives. And Steve,
well, you went full-time, part-time, full-time last year.
Yeah, last year I retired from Caterpillar. I'm an engineer. I was an engineer at Caterpillar. And a project manager. I left that last year so that I could spend more time with my honeybees and my passion. And Steve's still working at Caterpillar. And
I'm much more of the hobbyist. I run, more probably the 5 to 15 range. More than 15, I start to feel like it's becoming a chore. But less than 5, and my losses in winter usually put me in a really down, really disappointed state. So I typically hover between that 5 and 15. We're both active in our local club. We do both have some students. I do mentor quite a bit. So that's a little quick note on our background. Do you keep bees for sort of a research point, or like are you doing packages, queens, or just honey?
All right. So I actually got up to 150 2 years ago, but I was doing pollination, a little bit of pollination of watermelons and pumpkins. But that was so hard on my bees that I decided to cut back, and I'd like to stay between 80 and 100. I'm doing mostly honey production. I will in a pinch pollinate for some local farmers if they really get in a pinch. But it's honey production. I do sell nukes in the spring. I sell a few nukes because people lose colonies. And then I sell my honey at just usually one farmer's market. And I just sold out last week or the week before.
How many pounds do you take this year?
It was a bad year. I'm looking at my thing up here on the board. It was about just over 1,000 pounds. So it really was.
That's what Luke took.
Yeah. So I took about 1,500 of my honey, and then I managed colonies for people. Yeah. So right, because you always get the common thing that was being said was, "It's neat that you keep honeybees. I would do it too, but that's so much hard work." So I have found a solution for that, right? And I keep honeybees for people.
Yeah.
And then they get their honey and they can have their hive on their property. And it spreads some local knowledge.
It's like having a pool, right? You love the pool, but you don't want to clean it. So you hire a guy to do it.
I'm the bee boy.
That's very, very lucrative. Very lucrative. I don't want to do that just because. And you were talking about that once you get above 15, it's kind of work. I still enjoy it so much that for me, it's relaxation. I'm doing a lot of other things. And so the beekeeping is literally it's a great sideline relaxation thing. Yeah. Now, don't always keep them the best. I mean, I'm not, because I've traveled a lot and things like that, but still I use them as relaxation almost.
And I think that's a common thing amongst beekeepers is that we're not always perfect beekeepers. And anybody that says that they are, you are usually either doing it full time or they're lying.
They're a keyboard hero.
Keyboard hero.
They're on the forums or on the Facebook or whatever, pretending that. But I was turned on to your recent webinar that you posted back in April on YouTube from the Apimondia organization that you did covering the Tropilaelaps. It was quite a watch, all 3 hours. I may have watched it on like a 2X, so I didn't have that much time in front of the screen. But you do a great job in that webinar. We'll have a link into it in the show notes where I encourage our viewers to go if you want some more deeper dive into some of the topics that we'll probably just cover the surface here on the podcast. There's a lot of great information there. It's where a lot of the information that I have came from. So I think we should probably start there with the work you did with that organization for a bunch of years. Can you give us some basic information on the Tropilaelaps mite and how it perhaps is different than the Varroa mite that we all know as a regular beekeeper?
Right. Well, I'll actually start with the similarities. So it's very similar to Varroa in some ways. It just like Varroa, it moves into the cell right before the cell is capped. And so it goes into the cell and starts feeding on the larval honeybee, and the bees seal it over. And so it reproduces in that cell just like Varroa, when Varroa reproduces in the cells on worker bees. When the bee comes out, a Varroa mite has to then move on and usually feed on nurse bees. It feeds on nurse bees or other adult bees in the colony for 6, 7, 10 days or more out on the adult bees. Then it can move back into a cell. The big difference is that Tropilaelaps doesn't feed on adults at all. So it comes out of the cell, it can immediately walk next door and find another cell. So it reproduces much faster. And even for sampling and things, since it's not often on adult bees, it's kind of hard to use our sugar shake and things, although people have done it. But I like to look in the brood to see if the Tropilaelaps mite is there. And so the big difference is that it doesn't feed on adult bees. And by doing that, it can reproduce faster, move right back into cells.
Some of the information I saw says it's much, much smaller than a Varroa mite, like 1/3 the size?
About the third the size.
And then much faster.
Yeah. If you like Project Apiceum, Pam out in California, Project Apiceum has some great videos. That podcast, I think we had some videos in that webinar that we did. Yeah. I'm not sure, but Auburn University also has some. That visual of them running on the combs is very diagnostic. I mean, they scoot around very fast. And yeah, you're right. They're about 1/3 the size of a Varroa.
So in those videos, when they're moving around on the top of the combs really fast, I assume that was a really bad infestation, at which point that they're moving around the top. So, for instance, with Varroa, if you see Varroa in your hive, like if they're hitching it back right in the back of the bee, it's because there's nowhere else to hide, right? There's nowhere else to go. Is that true? Are we talking the same kind of behavior with the Tropilaelaps mites, or is that totally different?
No, it's probably true. If you pull a frame out and you can see Tropilaelaps mites running on the comb without uncapping anything or doing anything, you probably have a fairly high infestation. The other thing, the beekeepers I know in Southeast Asia, our bees will uncap something in the pupal stage, and I call it bald brood. You'll see it with wax moth damage and things like that. you'll see that often with Tropilaelaps. And so if you see bald brood and different things, that's also a sign of Tropilaelaps. But yeah, you're right. If you see them running on the combs, the infestation is probably pretty high.
Okay.
I guess there was also some differences on its reproductive cycle where, could you talk about the differences on how, like, laying the eggs, right? I think there was, Varroa starts with a male and the Tropy starts with a female. And how is that important?
Well, just that, I think, and again, I'm not perfect on the life cycle, but you're right that Varroa starts with a male, and then he mates with his sisters that are in that cell, so he never comes out of the cell. Whereas in Tropilaelaps mites, I believe the male can come out of the cell, and so there can be multiple females as the bee emerges. Even some of those immature females that maybe are not fully mature might be able to survive because they can go and look in another cell. So it's really it's the fact that they can come out of one cell and go directly back in another cell that makes them very dangerous in how fast they build up, how fast the population grows.
There seems to be a pretty good map of where the Tropilaelaps are globally.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere that's been added recently that we should know about that's unusual?
Yeah, a little bit. So we always thought, I'll give you a little more. We always thought they'd be in Southeast Asia where it's warm. That's where they originated. And they'd only be in Southeast Asia. Anywhere we got a brood break, a nice 2 or 3 months brood break, so they couldn't reproduce in brood. They die off because they can't feed on adults. Well, they started moving into Korea. They moved into northern China. They started getting into colder and colder regions. And just this past year, in 2024, we have Tropilaelaps in, I think it's Azerbaijan, Georgia, the former Soviet Union country of Georgia, and part of Russia. And it's right on the doorstep of Western Europe. So it's never gotten that close to a lot of other European bees. So it's really on the move a bit. Okay. And we don't quite understand why, but it's expanding its range.
So you touched on the fact that they don't feed on the adult bee, and therefore they don't spend a lot of time outside the cells. Do we know how much time they will spend outside the cells? Like Varroa mites, I guess they'll hang around outside for quite a bit, hitch a ride, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What about the trophy mites?
I don't know if anyone's done some detailed marking to see in general how often, but probably no more than 2 to 3 days out. And in fact, I think we believe that within 1 or 2 days, they've moved back into another cell. But to my knowledge, I don't know that precisely.
And that's primarily where we get this figure. I guess there's a lot of debate about how long they'll live not in a brood cell. So basically outside, right?
Right.
And so that question sort of piggybacks on that one. So it seems like there's a 3-day number, a 6-day number. It seems to be a lot of.
Yeah, I just heard a 10-day number too, where they lived on with comb, but not with larvae. So
you're close. So the old number was 3 to 4 days, and that's been pretty consistent in a bunch of studies. Then there was a recent study that they lived 6 days on dry comb, just worker comb, but with nothing in it that they could tell. And so they doubled from 3 days to 6 days on dry comb. A woman in Great Britain, Maggie Gill, was doing some work, and they were feeding on the dead bees in some of her experiments. And so she set up a quick experiment. Live bees, she put live bees in a cage, and the mites drop out after 4 to 5 days, usually 4 days. The mites will drop out dead because they can't feed. If you have dead bees in the cage, they can feed on the dead bees for up to 9 days, or we can stay alive up to 9 days. We think that then that bee becomes so rotten that even if the trophy mites try to feed on it, that they end up dying.
And these are adult live bees? Adult dead bees?
These are adult dead bees. Yeah, adult dead bees. Yeah.
Interesting.
So 4 days on adult bees without anything, up to 6 days on comb, and then up to 9 days with live bees and dead bees. Yeah. We keep expanding the survival. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd prefer it goes the other direction.
And I guess
Yeah.
I guess that's a lot of people have been focused on that number because I guess the most recent scare that we had locally here in North America was the fact that some were found on a colony on a ship. And I guess the concern is that if you have the mites hitching a ride on a swarm or a package, that the number of days that object needs to be in transition is sort of important for control mechanisms.
Right. Right.
And so, do we have any more information about what was actually found when the report was made about this being found on the boat?
Just that the boat was like some large number of miles offshore, like almost over in Europe, but it was heading for the U.S. And they discovered the swarm, they killed it, and they collected some, and sure enough, it had Tropilaelaps mites in that swarm. What I'm unclear about is where the ship was coming from. It was coming to the U.S., but it was quite a few days sailing before it would have gotten to the U.S. It's actually not uncommon at all for us to have swarms on ships, and it happens way too often. This was Apis dorsata, which is the giant honeybee. So that's a bit unusual. So it was we believe, the natural host of Tropilaelaps mites, and there were mites present. It was well offshore, but yeah, these ships come into port if the swarm's not detected, or if it had comb with brood, and that's part I don't understand. I need to reread it. I saw the announcement, but to me it wasn't clear if they had built comb and where they had brood. I wasn't sure about that. So,
So I think it was Apis cerana. I don't think it was dorsata.
Really?
I think it was cerana. Which I thought was.
But either way, if the boat was only 3 days offshore, right, then you're still within the air. They're still within that lifespan of the swarm flies to the boat while it's still in port, and then the boat leaves, and then 3 days later, you find this. A boat worker finds the swarm hanging on the side of a container or wherever, and then they kill it and collect it. You're still within that sort of nominal survival time period where we haven't had some strange occurrence happen. It just, the details there are still a little fuzzy. Am I correct?
They're fuzzy to me, and I was and I should be better informed, but I'm not at this point. And again, it took them a long time. First of all, they wanted to be sure of the identification, and I thought I read something about dorsata, but you're right. I mean, it could have been cerana. I know it was one of the Asian honeybee species. So yes, if a swarm, let's say there's a container in, let's say, Thailand, and it's parked at the dock. If they move on to that container and they build comb and start rearing brood, then I mean, they could easily survive, all the way to whatever port, and then they set that container off. Now we've got a swarm. Hopefully, they would find the swarms. That's maybe the only saving grace we've got. That dock workers, they usually don't like those things, and they report them and they get killed.
When you talk about the spread of the mite, currently in the tracking that Apimondia is doing, do you guys have a vector for your spread normally? Is it you're moving packages, you're moving swarms, or you're moving full hives across countries, imports, things like that? Or is it just normal, they hitch a ride in a swarm and they're going to move, a couple miles every year?
I think it's mostly humans moving colonies like within a country. So it comes into, I think it's in let's say it's in Kazakhstan. I'm not sure if it is in Kazakhstan. I think it is in Kazakhstan. Big country. So they get them in the eastern part first, and they don't know it until they move them all the way to the western part. So I think the primary thing that we believe is just people moving colonies, migratory beekeeping. Swarming, obviously, but that's more slow movement, the swarming, the natural expansion. I did some work in Korea on survival in package bees, and I got them only living 4 days, but I didn't look at the dead bees. And I talked to this researcher, Maggie Gill. She said, you should have looked at the dead bees in the package. There probably were some mites in there. But package, my thing on package bees is if you don't put them on if you don't put the package on, you don't use them to boost an existing colony, you're probably kind of safe. So the package is 3 or 4 days in transit. Most of those mites die. I would then use, I don't have my package in here. I'd use what I call the no shake method, set the package in, let the bees work over onto the combs. So there is a way to slow down the potential for package movement by, the way you install it, and never install them on an existing colony where you already have brood present, because then the mites would take right off.
Let's switch gears and talk about treatment. What is the main way Korea and Thailand, Asia, is currently fighting this?
One method that I won't really talk about is a powder that we would never use in the U.S. It's just something that's illegal. The main thing that's been tested and works really well is formic acid, because it does, just like with Varroa, it kills in the cell. So formic acid is highly effective against Tropilaelaps. I have a paper out that says Amitraz didn't work, but I've just done recent research where Amiflex gel, which is Amitraz, does work. I don't know. Well, they're using oxalic acid vaporization, but I've just never tested it. But I know they're using, in many parts of Asia, they're using oxalic acid vaporization.
So when they do that, the dosage there's a couple things. The dosage, we know, it's been proven, right? The dosage for Varroa mites is not high enough in the United States currently, right? You're talking about, I believe you need 2 grams per box, which is what Europe approves. And we also need to talk about duration of when that happens. So if they're mostly in the cells, right? And how, so what, if you're talking about oxalic acid, I'd be really interested in seeing what dose are they using and how are they applying it? Because there's 3 ways that I know of right now to apply it. There's, you can turn it into a gas, you can put it on a pad, or you can drip it on the bees.
Right.
So I'm really interested in, do you know how they're applying it currently as far as oxalic goes?
Not in enough detail to report on it, except I know they're using, they're vaporizing it.
Okay.
But I don't know the interval. And I say that because even with our slower release with glycerin pads, there just hasn't been much testing done on that, to my knowledge. And I didn't see people using it in Korea. I saw them occasionally using dribble, but mostly using vaporization. But I don't have the interval, how often they were applying that. But you're right. If Varroa is 70% in the brood, 30% on the workers, just roughly, Tropilaelaps is closer to 80 at least, and maybe higher, the proportion in the brood versus the workers.
And it sounded like in your webinar, there was a lot of talk about a cultural control, I guess is what they were calling it, which was basically just a brood break. I guess for most tropical climates, the bees are active for most all the year, so you don't get a hard winter and a hard natural brood break. So they were intentionally caging the queen in the hive to force a brood break, and it sounded like, how effective do you think that method is in and of itself?
It was very effective. This was a group from Auburn. They forced a brood break. Once they were broodless, they applied formic and oxalic. And I don't have the citation for that paper, but it's a recent paper. They were trying to eliminate the mites. If they were doing this for APHIS, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, can we completely eliminate mites from a colony? They knocked them down with oxalic and formic really low by forcing this brood break. It's kind of labor intensive, but they weren't able to completely eliminate the mites. So even with a nice brood break, formic or oxalic, they didn't get total elimination. So yeah.
What is the main mechanism for which this mite is going to kill our hive?
Just the fast reproduction. So it's going to, even if you're kind of monitoring it, and within a month or month and a half, 2 months, the population can grow really rapidly, and you kind of maybe get caught unaware. There's some papers where, yes, it's transmitting the viruses just like Varroa, but the damage that I've seen in Thailand and Korea is just the direct feeding. The fact when the mite populations build up, they really weaken the hive. They weaken it by direct feeding.
You'll see that with melted larvae, that sort of thing, where
Yeah, just spotty brood, and the ones that are fed upon in the larval stage, they shorten their lifespan and stuff. So you just the colony just gets weaker and weaker over time. Yeah.
If and when this gets to North America, are we going to be able to identify the signs of, because I mean, we've all seen, well, I wouldn't say all, a lot of us have seen, a parasitic mite syndrome, right? Really high Varroa mite counts, bald brood, melted larva, right? If we see these symptoms, and we've talked to experts in our club about parasitic mite syndrome and how for a lot of people it's can't tell it apart. Indistinguishable. Thank you, Luke. Between that and EFB, we struggle with some EFB here in Central Illinois. So these are all things we see. So, like, if I were to give you a hive that had tropy mites in it, and you didn't know what to look for with the actual mites, you were just looking at the obvious brood signs.
Right.
Do you think you could pick it out as anything different than a high Varroa infestation or an EFB or a parasitic mite syndrome?
Yeah,
I think so, because I agree that high Varroa stuff can kind of mimic EFB and things like that. But the Tropilaelaps, it's very similar to the Varroa, but again, I guess maybe because I worked enough with it, I think you'd notice that it was a little bit different than things you'd seen before. You'll know that something's wrong. You got a really bad brood pattern. You've got spottiness. You've got uncapped cells and things like that. At that point, if it was that bad, you probably could see, even with poor eyes, you could probably see the mites running around. Again, watching that video to get a visual image of what it looks like running on the comb is very characteristic.
So a question was brought up in some meetings that I was in, and I didn't know the answer to it, and maybe you do. So we've compared some of the similarities between Varroa and tropy mites. What are the diseases that the viruses, I should say, that they carry the same? Are we still looking at deformed wing virus? Are we looking at like black queen virus? Or what are we looking at as far as comparing those viruses?
Yeah, I think there's only about 2 or 3 papers with Tropilaelaps, and in every case that they've tested, any of the ones that are common in Varroa, we can see them reproducing or being present in Tropilaelaps. What I haven't noticed, and this is different, is deformed wing virus is pretty common, and you see it in the bees. I've never personally seen it with Tropilaelaps where I see that symptom in the bees, but that doesn't mean it doesn't occur. But I've not seen it. So, but I don't see that there would be any differences between the virus types that they're transmitting.
Okay. And then there's a follow-up question I have with that. So earlier in the year, we interviewed Dallin Animal Clinic. And the reason I was asking that question is like, well, would you have something like the vaccine that that Dallin supplies? Would that have a positive impact? Has that been studied on Apis mellifera and that are infected with tropy mites to see what kind of impact that has on those bees?
I don't think it's been tested that I know of, but I do know I saw them report on some inoculated queens, and the inoculated queen colonies had much lower virus titers than the uninoculated. So whatever they were doing to try to knock down the AFB, which I think it really does, it was also having an effect on virus loads in those colonies. And they didn't understand it, except it looked like a real result. So yeah, theoretically, it could be helpful in that regard. It'll be a carryover, just reducing the amount of, because, we used to could tolerate higher Varroa levels, and now the Varroa and the virus combined, we can't tolerate quite as high Varroa levels. But yeah, it's promising.
In Southeast Asia, the work being done on the tropy mites, those are primarily studied on Apis mellifera hives or on the Asia large bee hives? Or are you mostly like looking at the impact of Apis mellifera hives that are there in Asia?
Right. Very, very good question. So all the literature says it came from Apis dorsata, from the giant honeybee group. But those bees migrate. They'll migrate from the highlands down to the lowlands, so they move as a swarm. Then they have to set up and build comb and start rearing brood. We don't understand if that's true. How do they survive that migration period? So that's something we've been talking about amongst some of us, some of the researchers. I'm not 100% sure it's dorsata, but anyway, that's the giant honeybee. Most of what we've looked at in Thailand is Apis cerana, the general Asian honeybee, multiple comb bee, and Apis mellifera. And the Asian honeybee, Apis cerana, the mite doesn't build up as readily. So when they're in the same apiary, people keep both of them very commonly. And the Apis cerana colony the populations don't build like they do in our bees, in our European bees.
Well, I think they just released a study on that, right? That says basically when a Apis cerana larva is fed on by Varroa, it commits apoptosis. Apoptosis. Yeah. Thank you. It kills itself.
The one for Varroa, they called it something suicide. What was it called? I don't know. Social suicide. Something. Yeah, they showed it first in Varroa. When Varroa moves into Apis cerana brood, the brood dies. So that pretty good mechanism.
Takes care of itself. All right.
Yeah.
So are they back to the Apis mellifera in Asia? Are they using the hives, the Apis mellifera hives there, like we use hives in Europe or in North America as a pollinator or as a honey producer, or are they bringing them in just for study? Like, how are they using Apis mellifera there in Southeast Asia?
So I know Korea very well and Thailand very well. In northern Thailand, they keep a ton of Apis mellifera colonies. They're all single brood boxes. Occasionally they'll super them, and it's all mostly for honey production. And what they do is as they start building honey in these outside frames, they pull them out and put new frames in. So they do a lot in a single box. In Korea, again, they're keeping a lot of Apis mellifera colonies, mostly for honey production, some for pollination, but they do super them there. They do super them some. So they moved them in because they're better. They believe, and usually they are better honey producers, but they have problems. They have more Tropilaelaps, they have more Varroa, things like that. Let me. There's a good story in here about North America compared to Korea and compared to Thailand. In Thailand, the beekeepers have to worry about Tropilaelaps. Number one, it builds up so fast that they're always treating for Tropilaelaps, and they're kind of killing Varroa secondarily with whatever they're using, Formic or whatever. In Korea, they have to stay ahead of Varroa first for some reason. Tropilaelaps is there, it builds up, but not as readily. So we think even if it came to the U.S., we would believe we'd still have a primary Varroa problem and a secondary Tropilaelaps problem. If Korea is a good indication, and it's a cold country. So, and that gets back to, I think you were saying how bad is this? How bad is this? Well, based on Korea, it's number 2. It falls behind Varroa. So there's a little bit of a silver lining, right?
Yeah, and we're here in Central Illinois, right? So we do get a hard winter. I am of a belief that we do get a 0 capped brood portion in the dead of winter. It's just not a handful of cells that are 2-inch diameter kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We're both good friends with Randy. Luke and I do cutouts, so we talk to Randy a lot, 628 Dirt Rooster a lot about his cutouts. He's down on the coast of the U.S. down there, and it really sounds like, for his winter, there are many years where, he probably doesn't have a solid brood break down there. So It seems like there'll be a distinct difference in how it impacts colonies across the U.S. based on our temperature, weather variations across the country.
I would say that's true. Florida, you think about Florida, Southern California, Texas, because they do. There's some brood rearing there year round, and it could be in those areas that Tropilaelaps is the primary and Varroa is the secondary. The good news, it's not good news. The good news is that most of the treatments are going to be interchangeable. But you still have to come up with a schedule, and you touched on that earlier. Like, what is the interval that we need to treat? And with some of these things, organic acids and stuff, we don't know as much. with Tropilaelaps.
Right. Well, so the tropy, from my understanding too, the tropy genome is slightly different than the Varroa genome, and they have a larger percentage of their genome, which I think has been mapped, dedicated to detoxification. Right. So, as fast as they reproduce, it'll be interesting to see if stuff, especially our synthetic miticides, if they adjust to that much quicker than the Varroa.
They become more resistant much more quick. That could be.
Do you have any insight as to whether or not people are doing any kind of research with our VSH queens? You know, our queens that we're hoping can sense, their colonies can sense Varroa mites underneath cells and be proactive in opening up those cells, pulling out the larvae, dealing with the mites there. If there's any will there be any carryover, or is there any carryover to the tropy mites? Are that we, you know, for lack of a better way to ask the question, are we going to be able to smell those under the caps too?
I think it's highly likely, because I think some of what they're smelling is not the actual mite, but the damage it's doing during feeding. At least that's one way to think about it. But to my knowledge, I haven't seen the results of any research where people took really good VSH queens over into Korea, let's say, and did a side-by-side comparison. So it's certainly feasible. It certainly makes sense. But to my knowledge, no one's done that.
What about the dsRNA treatments that we just got released for Varroa just this year, basically, right? Do you know if there's anyone's doing that kind of development for it's? I've heard, well, this will kill your hive in 1 month, right? And that's terrifying, especially for somebody that has 100 hives, right? If I went from 100 to 1 hive, right? I got a lot of equipment sent out. So do you know if any of that research is being done?
On the double-stranded RNA?
Yeah.
Not that I know of, but again, I don't know everything. The most active groups, there's a real active group in Korea, Thailand, Jeff Williams' group at Auburn, this group in the UK, and there's several others, Sammy Ramsey from Colorado. So there's several people working, but to my knowledge, no one's working on that particular aspect, but I could be wrong.
Do you know of any efforts to locate tropy in other regions it's not currently actively being looked for? You know, Mexico, Canada, farther into Western Europe. I remember his name. There was a guy, a researcher from Georgia, who was in your April webinar, who had done a lot of good hands on how are we actually going to test our colonies to determine if we have it there. And he's the one who sort of pioneered the idea of using wax strips, you know, the leg waxing strips, and applying it to the top of the caps and ripping them off, and then videoing that and then looking for it. So he seems to be on the sort of the front line of where it's just moved to and coming up with good methods to find it. Do you know of anybody else that's continuing to take those methods and look for it where we don't know that it currently is? You know, Australia. Why isn't it in Australia? Australia seems like it's awfully close, geographically speaking, and yet nobody's talking about it being there.
In Japan too, right? Japan has Apis cerana, and I just
it's close. I guess Japan, smaller, maybe less shipping going in. Australia. So I can tell you, when I worked with USDA, we were worried about some things coming from Australia, so we asked to see the port imports of all the swarms that they'd caught coming into the ports in Sydney and all these different places. And I looked at 3 or 4 years of Australian import. They got everything into those ports. I mean, they got Apis cerana, they got dorsata, they got all these swarms on ships. We don't have nearly the traffic that they had. And right now they seem to still be free of Tropilaelaps, and they've just gotten Varroa. Alex Usinoff is the guy's name. The guy that pulled the wax strip off the comb. So the idea is you've got a sealed brood comb, you put wax over here and you rip it off and you uncap 300 cells, let's say. You can just watch and see the mites move. I actually like to then take it and bump it on a white pan, and you can see the mites running around on the pan. You can also if you don't want to use the wax, you can take a sharp blade and just gently cut the cappings off and then bump it, and the mites will come out. So there'll probably be some papers coming out now on some of these more rapid methods of detection. And I think there's a lot of us raising awareness in Europe in particular, and Australia and other places, let's start surveying for it a bit. We've been doing that in the U.S. in our 50 colony survey. And so we've been kind of looking, we're pretty sure it's never been in the U.S. We would have picked it up. It would have started damaging colonies for sure. Kind of to your question, we're raising awareness, especially in Europe, because it's right on Europe's door, and people are starting to actively survey for it. Yeah.
So that leads me to a question that I've heard discussed quite a bit, and it's something that I follow along with. Canada does not import bees from the United States currently. Right? Because probably political issues, right? But but they do import from Russia, right? Specifically from Georgia, I believe. Or Ukraine.
Ukraine until just recently. Yeah.
Okay. And are we concerned about them being a potential source of infection into the North Americas for those honeybees?
I have good Canadian friends, and they laughed at us 2 or 3 years ago when we said, hey, your packaged bee imports could be a threat. And they were like, oh, come on. But yes. So the short answer is yes, very much. And Ukraine, where they found them in Russia, is right next to Ukraine. And is anybody sampling in Ukraine? I don't think so.
Yeah,
seems like they have bigger issues right now.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's certainly, queens are not nearly the risk, obviously, as packaged bees would be more of a risk. It is a risk. I'm trying to think of where else. I think they get some packages from Chile. They get them from New Zealand and Australia as well. But the Ukrainian packages were the ones that we really got worried about because, okay, well, how has Tropy been undetected?
So, Luke, it sounds like if you want to go on to get, do your PhD student thesis, maybe you round up some VHS queens and take a trip over to Thailand with some VHS queens and do that for a PhD student.
Yeah.
So I think there might be something there with, maybe we can nip both these problems in the bud with some good, because isn't that sort of the silver bullet that everybody's pinning their hat on?
It is. It's where they got their fingers crossed on.
For long-term mite control is so we don't have to put pesticides or acids in our hive and just be like Apis cerana where it just takes care of it themselves, right?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that that's not already there. I'm guessing that there is somebody already there studying that, but maybe that's a U.S.-based obsession. I just did the math today to determine how many honey queens would have to be produced in the United States in order to be to make them all VSH queens.
I mean, we've got tens of millions of colonies in the U.S. though, don't we?
Yeah. So the math and this is just population growth math and things. It was basically we'd have to create 3 million queens for 3 to 5 years, and get those out to people.
I get that. We did 10, 15 this past year. We're good.
Hey, piece of cake, right?
Piece of cake. Right. We'll have this licked in no time.
It'd also have to be mated too, right? So you'd have to. That'd be a lot of milking drones, which would be really painful.
Well, I think that wraps it up. Do you have any other questions?
I got another one. So, and this is the one. So, well, there's I've got two. One of them is, so if there's something that was practical, because we focus largely on things that you can do. So if there's something practical as a U.S. beekeeper that is listening to this podcast, what would you suggest that they do?
First thing is watch some of these videos that are out there, Project Apis M videos or whatever. And then you could also try that wax decapping method or something but of course you're not in the US right now, you're not going to see anything. But I would watch some of the videos to get an idea of what that might look like if I happen to see it in my colony. And beyond that, maybe just stay informed. If you're living in a state that has a port like Savannah, Georgia, where we just got yellow-legged hornets in, or New York or San Francisco or something like that, encourage your local people to maybe put sentinel hives around these ports. I think that's all. I've always thought that was a good idea. Put these sentinel hives near the ports that might catch something coming in, and we could monitor those, instead of monitoring, everything. But yeah.
Okay, and I've got one more, which may or may not be a happy or sad answer. I think that the United States handled the bringing over of Varroa mites pretty poorly. We didn't really have a plan, and it made major impacts to both the commercial honeybee keepers and the hobbyists when they came over. We've got a little bit better handle on it now. Is there anything that you believe that we were going to do better with the trophy mite compared to that, or what hope do you have of us doing better?
I'm an optimist, and I'll tell you why I'm optimistic that Tropilaelaps comes into some places and starts to spread. Because most beekeepers are dealing with Varroa now, I think we would be able to deal with Tropilaelaps. I'm not one that go, oh, it'll be the worst thing that ever happened to U.S. beekeeping. We've had a lot of new things come in. I deal with small hive beetles all the time. They're always reproducing. If I have dead outs, I'm having trouble. So I think we've already learned a lot as beekeepers about how to control Varroa or how to keep it down with cultural methods and stuff. And Tropilaelaps is going to be very similar. So I'm not a doomsday person. I don't want it. I don't want it to come in, but it won't be the end of beekeeping. And you touched on having better genetics. If we continue to breed better mite-resistant bees, we can get around some of this. Yeah.
And what do you think will happen to the diehards in the beekeeping community that are convinced that the treatment-free for Varroa mites is their best plan for keeping bees? What do you think will happen to them?
Well, you lose when you go treatment-free. You lose a lot of colonies because you have to, the natural selection that goes on. So I'd like to see more and more of these good breeding programs that have already taken those hits, and then get that stock out to beekeepers. The stock, because I do think a mite-resistant stock, and I don't like to use resistant, mite-tolerant stock, and then occasionally you make a split to reduce Varroa, or maybe you occasionally apply up some formic or oxalic just to keep those mite levels down. We kind of got into a mindset we've got to kill every mite, and that's led to a lot of resistance in amitraz, fluvalinate, cumulus, whatever. We were trying to push the mite levels down to zero. So better genetics, and periodic use of some knockdown acaricides.
Yeah, so that's good news, right? That's not groundbreaking. Have to have lasers in our apiary that burn off mites as they run through the hives or something.
A Bill Gates mosquito laser.
Trying to do that, trying to like they were going to see them with good optics and zap them with lasers.
Yeah, yeah.
I think good bee genetics can take us a long way.
Are you on a personal note? Are you working? What's your preferred Varroa mite treatment that you're using in your apiary?
Well, I haven't used any synthetics ever, so it's always been formic and then oxalic, and I make splits. I make splits in the spring and sell nukes and stuff. Now I'm actually full disclosure. I'm consulting with this company, but we're trying a weak oxidant. It's like bleach or hydrogen peroxide, and it tends to do sterilization, and we have it killing some mites, but we're still working to optimize it. So I think there's new things coming along. I mean, there's be some new things coming along. You
have a flavor of bee you prefer? You work on a VSH? You work on a Georgia, or where did you say you were? You were
Georgia.
Georgia.
I'm in Maryland. But the queen breeder that I've known forever, he's gone through a selection process, and so I use a Georgia Italian queen that is that's fairly mite tolerant. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, we appreciate you being on today. Thanks for answering all our questions about the trophy mite. Like I said, if you're enjoyed the segment and you want to know more, there's an excellent webinar out there on the Apimondia website or the YouTube site from back in April that you headed up. So they'll see you there, and you get to talk to like a half a dozen or more experts around the world that have been working on this problem for a number of years, and it sounds like they're going to continue to work on it for more.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking with us tonight.
Thank you much. All right. Bye-bye.
I appreciate everybody listening to this point in the podcast. And remember, every beekeeper needs a buddy. We hope you found one of yours right here.